Hello everybody, my name is Manues and welcome to another Eternal Contenders video series here on my channel. This time I brought you an updated version of my Stonescar Aggro deck from a recent video due to popular demand. I have been changing the deck a bunch and experimenting with it further since the last video, and Ilya K managed to make it to Masters as first with the updated version of the deck basically, and since then people have been asking about the new list and a potential video for the new list, so I figured even though the old video hasn't been out that long, it's time for an updated video on the new version basically. So let's jump right in. I'll explain the differences to before basically. So this time I went up to 4 Flame Blast. So basically, compared to the old version, what I did is I cut 4 1-drops, being Knife Jack. Without 12 1-drops, I also had to cut the 2 Shadowlands Guide, because with 8 1-drops they're just not really very supportable, because you will have a lot of draws where you have a Shadowlands Guide and not even a 1-drop at all, not even in hand or in play, and the least in the void. And with fewer units, Bandit Queen also became worse and was kind of like an experimental thing to begin with. So I also cut the 2 Bandit Queens, and I replaced these 8 cards with 2 more Flame Blasts, which I already talked about in the last video, and the card's just really good, and there's plenty of games where you use it as like a cheap removal. For example, there's plenty of games where you go like turn 3, 1-drop, Flame Blast, a Rakano Outlaw, for example, against Rakano Aggro and stuff like that, or just like Flame Blast an Ember Acolyte for 1 and stuff like that. There's just like plenty of units that you can kill for 1 to 3 power with this in the early to mid game, which is really nice and helps you to gain tempo compared to Obliterate, which is very inflexible in terms of how much it costs. Sure, it's a bit more flexible in its damage distribution and a bit more efficient because you get 6 damage for 5 power, but the flexibility on sizing in Flame Blast has always impressed me and convinced me that Flame Blast is overall the better card if you can reasonably well support it. Another card that I added is 1 Dark Return, just because we kind of need to have a decent amount of units, and since there's no other units that I really felt comfortable running in like lower curve spots, I decided to add a Dark Return. It's even possible that there could be a second one, but 1 is a pretty safe number, because 1 means you will rarely end up in a situation where you have a Dark Return and nothing to get back with, and the first is always good, while drawing the second can be very lackluster, especially drawing 2 early on, and the card is just not super important so that I want to have it all the time. It's just like a nice card to round out the deck. The rest mostly still remained, currently still on 2 Suffocate, 2 Annihilate, partially due to having enough ways to deal with Titan. It is possible though that 3 Suffocate, 1 Annihilate is better. I'm going like back and forth between 3-1 and 2-2. Currently I'm on 2-2 again, partially due to Titan and generally big Combre seeing a surge with Martial Iron Thorns and Mystic Ascendants, where Annihilate gets a bit better. And it's also nicer against Impending Dooms in the Pseudo Mirror and stuff. And Suffocate has limited targets against the Combre decks. The Obelisk Combre decks can get their Seraph out of range with an Obelisk, and big Combre only has a few good targets. So it's a bit close which one is better. This one is surely better against the Felon-based control decks, for example, where it kills almost anything. But yeah, I'll leave this up to you. Feel free, if you run into more matchups where you think Suffocate is better, just run 3 Suffocate, 1 Annihilate, for example. We still have the 8 2-drops, which I'm really happy with. Outlaw is just really nice. The Warcry makes a pretty big impact in my experience. Like for example, Impending Doom, getting hit by one Warcry trigger already means it beats a Sandstorm Titan in combat, which is great. I also kept the 2 Countess, since that's like the only other kind of playable 3-drop in my opinion for this particular color combination. I'm not too happy about Countess simply because the deck wants to be heavy red, because it has only red 1-drops, it has triple red for Flame Blast, it has double red for Obliterate, and triple red for Champion. And usually the Overwhelm is more important than the Deadly, thanks to Rapid Shot, making the Deadly not as important until later in the game when the opponent tries to like trade block, and then dealing 4 to the face and 1 to the unit is great, and turning Champion into a burn spell, but the first one you want to turn on usually is the Overwhelm. So yeah, needing double Shadow on 3 is pretty awkward, and I would kind of want to replace her with something else. I just couldn't really find anything yet that makes me happy. Maybe there's like another 2-drop that's a fine alternative, like Lesrai Ranger or Obsidian Golem, but I tried both of these in prior versions and they haven't been that impressive. And yeah, I don't know. Also, Golem still requires Shadow on 2. Same for Ranger. So while they make the power base, like the influence a bit better, not incredibly probably. And then again, you also don't play Countess on 3 that often, because against harsh rule decks, for example, you tend to sandbag her as like an end of turn play after a harsh rule, for example, and there's often other things you can do on 3, like playing another 1 or 2 drop and using combat tricks and or removal, or you simply have a Champion of Chaos, which is the best turn 3 play anyway. So for now she has to stay, but I'm not super happy about her. She has her highs and lows, basically, as I already mentioned in the other video. Impending Doom still the best 4-drop for this type of deck in my opinion. Since, as I already explained, with fewer units Bandit Queen gets worse. Also, I haven't been too impressed with Bandit Queen in the first place, basically, simply because her being 4 strength, quick draw, and turning like the 1 and 2 drops still also only into like 3 or 4 strength units, makes it so that in a lot of board states you still can't really attack. Like against Combray, for example, a Combray healer still completely blanks your attack and eats your queen or your 1-drop or your outlaw or whatever. Oh, that's just not that nice. And currently as a curve topper I'm trying Obliterate. Initially I had 3 Drakes first, which is what Ilya ran to make it into Masters. But the problem with Drake is kind of that he rarely gets in more than 1 hit, and there's Sandstorm Titan that you can't always get rid of. So Sandstorm Titan kind of embarrasses Drake, which makes it really bad against time decks, and there's a lot of time-based, like Combray-based decks right now, big Combray, Obelisk Combray, multi-faction control decks that are base Combray. And there's still some Shimmer Pack with Sandstorm Titan, and there's some Xenon Killers with Titan. So all in all, there's probably 1/3 of the metagame or more, maybe close to 40 or 50% of the metagame running Sandstorm Titans. Then all these Combray-based decks also run Desert Marshal, which completely embarrasses and obliterates Drake. And then Drake is generally just a bit fragile against so many cards. It dies without dealing any damage to Torch, Annihilate, Desert Marshal, Wasp, and all of these answers are 2 to 4 power cheaper than Drake, also basically giving the opponent an opportunity to regain tempo, which is exactly not what we want. And also sometimes just runs into stuff like a Valkyrie Enforcer trading with it, which is also trading down, and in a matchup that is already like slipping away from you on the board, the ability of Drake is not as good as some people might think. It's mostly good against like unit light control decks that don't really pressure you and don't really block well either. but since this deck kind of wants to be able to finish the game when the opponent starts stabilizing and turning the game on you, Obliterate usually does that much more reliable, especially against these time-based decks. So I currently try 3 Obliterate over 3 Drake. It is also possible that you want some kind of mix, like 1 to 2 Drakes and 1 to 2 Obliterates. Probably still only 3 total. But currently I've been pretty happy with Obliterate. Like, one thing that Obliterate, for example, does is the opponent has like one blocker that is holding back 1 or 2 units from attacking, then you can just Obliterate that blocker, attack again, maybe get some overwhelm damage from the Obliterate on the opponent. Basically helps you regain momentum or keep momentum going. If you had momentum, then the opponent plays a blocker that is supposed to brick wall you, you Obliterate it and keep attacking, which is great. So it kind of lets the deck flow a little better and also play better off the top in losing positions, and gives you more reach against control decks, since older versions of this deck had some issues with harsh rule based control decks basically, and now having 7 heavy duty burn spells should help a lot, together with the Countess and rapid shots, to make sure that we can just kind of cheese out these reactive harsh rule decks with burn spells after we got in a couple attacks before harsh rule basically. The last 2 cards I added basically were going up from 27 to 29 power, since with 4 Obliterate, 4 Pyroknight, and 4 Flame Blast, 4 Pyroknight, and 3 Obliterate, and also kind of Countess, we need more power than 27. The 27 already were kind of borderline in the old version, but that only had a curve up to 4, so that was kind of okay. So it was somewhere between 27 and 28 at the optimum. So here 29 feels pretty good, since, as I said, usually the 6 power is still not a problem. The 7s is where it starts to get wonky, because all it does is basically add a damage to the Flame Blast, but even that can sometimes make the difference. I added 1 monument. I currently don't feel comfortable running more than 1, simply because you theoretically need 18 turn 1 red to have 90% chance of playing a 1-drop, a red 1-drop on turn 1. Currently we are at 13, 17, so we are 1 short, so we're probably at like 80 something percent to play a 1-drop on turn 1 if we have it. Actually I'm currently on 4 seals, and I recently was a bit annoyed with seals, so I'm not 100% sure if the 4th seal is 100% correct. It is possible that the 4th seal should be a sigil, but then again it's kind of hard. Like, if we add a fire sigil, we make it harder to reliably play Doom and Countess on curve and hit Champions of Chaos' second ability, and if we add a shadow sigil, we make Flame Blast now a 1-drop's worth. So we probably have to bite the bullet and just stick with the 4 seals, even though drawing that 2nd seal once you have 3 influence is really awkward and doesn't help these heavy requirements on the mentioned cards. But in your opening hand they basically help you set up the requirements preemptively and plan ahead. It's just the seals off the top later on that are a bit awkward, but as usual, if you cut seals for sigils, there's still always that 50% chance, or whatever depending on how you replace them, that they were the wrong seal. Like, if I cut a seal and replace it with a fire sigil, every time I draw this fire if I would replace that, say this diplomatic seal, the premium one would be cut for fire sigil, but instead of cutting it, I'll just leave it in and see what would happen every time I draw it and pretend it's a fire sigil. Basically 50% of the time it wouldn't even add the influence I need, because it would be a fire sigil and not a Shadow Sigil, so if I'm like short on Shadow, it doesn't help me anyway. That's the upside of, the big upside of Seal, that it basically, while it doesn't fix your influence later, early on it acts as both, basically being whatever you need, while if it is just a Fire Sigil, there's a 50% chance that it just doesn't help me anyway, more or less. I hope that wasn't too convoluted, but yeah, for Seal is a bit awkward, but probably a necessary evil. I tried 27 power to Varus Favor, that was awful. I've had so many situations where I needed to drop a power and had like a play and a Varus Favor, and basically had to decide between fetching power with Varus Favor or curving out with my units. So I cut them again for a regular Sigil and the Granite Monument. Since in most of these situations a Granite Monument would have been totally fine, while it would have still not been perfect. I could have still gone, for example, on Impending Doom, Granite Monument, to cast my Obliterate or Flame Blast or whatever the next turn. Well, with Varus Favor and basically foster Varus Favor to play my 5, or Doom and Varus Favor next turn and not play my 5. So that's just a terrible spot. If the black monument would, like the Shadow Monument would be good, I would probably play a second monument and just cut a Shadow Sigil. I just don't think we can really afford to cut a Fire Sigil for a second Granite Monument, and Granite Monument seems to be the only monument that makes sense in this deck. Also, keep in mind, if you compare this to like Burn Queen decks, which this is kind of close to now, basically kind of like a cleaned up version of the deck, that even they run like 25 power and 6 favors, which amounts to 31 power total. But this deck doesn't need 31 power, it just needs like 29, 30 maybe, but probably 29 is totally fine. Like in MTG this would be like a 24 land deck probably, but the optimum number would probably be between 23 and 24, closer to 24 than to 23. But since you cannot like fine-tune more than 23 or 24 in MTG, that doesn't work. But with the 75 cards, we basically get to fine-tune the percentage of power in our deck that we run a little more. So basically, while 30 power would equal 24 lands in MTG, 29 is more than 23 lands in MTG. So basically 29 power is close to the perfect amount of power for a deck like this. The influence requirements are still a bit short from the optimum, but so basically what I do here is I cut 6 favors for real power cards that don't cost me tempo and time to use and get me little value, especially the 2 Caleb's Favor don't really do much relevant stuff. Varus Favor varies from trivial to great, granted that, but it also is almost every time tempo inefficient because it costs 2 power to cast in a deck that wants to go 1, 2, 3, 4 preferably and bash the opponent's face in, so it's just not the right deck for it. It's better for mid-rangey and control decks and just not good for aggressive decks in my opinion. And I rather have 29 power and 2 real cards than 25 power and 6 favors that are like low impact cards. So that's basically the trade-off here. And I also get the upside of my sigils not coming from favors but from actual sigils, means I can just play them when I have them and draw them and don't need to waste time and power on getting the actual sigils, which is kind of the point in an aggressive deck that tries to curve out. So just keep those favors to your mid-range and control decks that don't want to curve out but react to what the opponent's doing. Varus Favor is great in these. This deck, better not. I just played it for a bit and it just felt so awful. Trust me, it's just not what a deck like this wants. So yeah, this is the current version. keep in mind, Obliterate is not 100% set in stone. Same for like the Forced Diplomatic Seal basically. Most of the other things are pretty nice. Pretty happy with the 4 Blast, 3 Obliterate, while Burn Queen usually runs 4 Obliterate, 3 Blast. Blast just so much more flexible, and usually by the time I have 5 power or more where I could cast Obliterate, I can also cast Flame Blast with the triple red influence, and I always have the option, if my draw allows it, to play it on turn 3 or turn 4, even alongside other plays. There's plenty of lines where I did something like attacked, rapid shotted, and then flame blasted after combat with the remaining power, where that wouldn't have worked with Obliterate and stuff like that. It's just so much more flexible in how many things you can do in a turn and what you can do. And gaining tempo, it's just a good card. And Obliterate is, while powerful, is very locked into being this clunky 5 power card that you cannot play before and not for less, which has been making a huge difference in my experience in games. So yeah, that's it with the update on the deck. The deck seems better now than before. The old deck was already doing pretty well for me. Basically the matchups that have been good before don't feel worse now. They feel about as good, at least. Like my Rakano matchup still is going as well as it used to, for example. But some of the matchups that have been weaker before potentially go better now, like harsh rule matchups. And yeah, the deck just finishes a bit better from behind, hits a bit harder, has a bit higher overall card quality, and just has more reach and a bit more flexibility in dealing with problematic units in play, since it has so many burn spells that can kill opponents, kill blockers, and end the game. Okay, as usual, I will take the deck into ranked for a couple of games after this to show it in action and teach you how to play it properly. So stay tuned, see you in a moment with the first half of the games. Thanks for watching.